Welcome, everyone, to the Q&A session for our upcoming course, Reclaiming Original Goodness, the 7-week journey into St. Thomas Aquinas' spiritual legacy of hope and inspired leadership during times of crisis. I'm Lisa Bonise, and it's my honor to be hosting this Q&A conversation for the Shift Network, where we'll explore the teachings of Matthew Fox and address questions about his upcoming 7-week course, Reclaiming Original Goodness, which begins Thursday, July 2nd. And a little later, I'll explain how you can participate in the course, even if you can't attend the live sessions. But first, I want to introduce our guest. Matthew Fox is a prolific author of books dedicated to renewing the ancient tradition of creation spirituality. His work helps reconnect science and spirituality by honoring the sacredness of the cosmos and interacting with contemporary scientists who are also mystics. Matthew's a member of the Dominican Order for 34 years, and he established an institute in culture and creation spirituality that operated for 7 years at Mundelein College in Chicago and for 12 years at Holy Names College in Oakland, California. He founded the University of Creation Spirituality in Oakland in 1996 and was president and professor until 2005, when he left to create a pilot project to reinvent the educational experience for inner-city teenagers. And in just a few minutes, we're going to open up for your questions. But first, I want to welcome Matthew, who's going to start us out by leading us in an opening prayer. Welcome, Matthew. It's so good to see you today.
Thank you, Lisa. Good to be with you and all those who are present today. And when you asked me if I wanted to lead with a prayer, I thought we might do a little chant based on phrases we can make mantras of from Thomas Aquinas. One of these phrases is in the title of our class, Original Goodness. So I thought we might pick up on that theme of goodness because it penetrates all of his thinking. So for this prayer, I'm going to ask you to sit up comfortably, but with a straight back, feet on the floor. And I'll simply chant, mantra form, a few of these phrases, but I invite you to join me. And you want to turn your microphone off because, as you probably know, when people sing together on Zoom, there's cacophony because of the sound does not come through equally from every corner. So turn your microphone off. I will have mine on, but do join in and, don't be mousy about it. Let the breath come out, be as loud as you want to be, but don't be overly soft, Okay, so let's have this as our opening prayer. Let's begin in silence, get settled, centered. We'll be calling in the spirit of goodness from all its directions. Goodness, 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 goodness. Beauty, 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 beauty. Common good, common good, common good, common good, common good, common good. Pursue the goodness, preserve 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 the goodness, 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 goodness. Amen. Another word for original goodness is original blessing, which was the title of a major book of mine that upset a lot of people in the Vatican. Not the present Vatican, but 2 previous papacies, 34 years worth. It raised the roof, I think, in the Vatican. But in fact, it was much more recently that I discovered in Aquinas this phrase, original goodness, and he's a saint and a doctor of the church. He'd written about this in the 13th century. I don't know why a book called Original Blessing so upset the powers that be in the Vatican, but maybe you do. Um, and of course, part of goodness is praise. You be looking for goodness. It's a beautiful teaching from Rilke, the poet, who says, walk your walk of lament on a path of praise. Walk your walk of lament on a path of praise. If you want to always, in a time of lamentation like ours today, with coronavirus on the ascent, and with ecological collapse and climate change all around us, and of course, with the history of racism and genocide finally being unveiled, you might say, for all to take a hard look at because of the murder by a policeman of George Floyd in Minneapolis and so forth, brings up so many other deja vu experiences. In all this context of darkness and suffering and pain and moral outrage, we want to keep the sense of goodness very much alive, because that has to embrace the sense of goodness, capacity for love and creativity, and also letting go and moving on. This is so primal, and that's why returning to a person like Aquinas today of substance, who got it right, is so valuable, and at a time like this. And one of his teachings, this right to preserve the goodness, that phrase from him, that's his definition of salvation. He says that salvation primarily and first of all means to preserve the good. If we're not in touch with the good, we don't even know what salvation and healing is all about. So anyway, there's a lot of depth and meaning to each of those phrases that we just chanted as found in Aquinas. And he also relates goodness and beauty. He says the only difference between beauty and goodness, he says, is that beauty is kind of more intellectual, more cognitive. It appeals more to our mind, if you will, whereas goodness appeals more to the heart. But they're really the same thing. One has a heart direction, love, and the other has a mind direction, and that's beauty.
Interesting. Thank you. Thank you for the prayer and for the words. I think we're off to a really good start. We have the rest of our time together to dive into our viewers' questions for Matthew as we prepare for his upcoming course. Again, it's called Reclaiming Original Goodness, and it begins Thursday, July 2nd. And if you want to check out the website, sort of follow along with us and learn more about the 7-week course, you can visit thomasaqui.com. You'll see it at the bottom of your screen, all spelled out for you. And that's where you'll find the full description. So let's go ahead and get into some questions. If you have a question for Matthew, go ahead and type it in, and I'll be happy to read it out loud. And in the meantime, I've already got some questions that have been submitted. So let's start out with one that came in as you were just talking about our current events, etc. Cynthia wants to know, do you think that are we as a species evolving or devolving?
Well, it's up to us. If we make the choices that we need to make, if we can move on beyond racism, if we can move on beyond anthropocentrism, what Pope Francis calls narcissism of the modern era, when we were thinking for the most part only about ourselves and how much we could extract from nature instead of how much we could preserve in the good. If we can move on from our reptilian brains, which I think are dominant and always dominant in a patriarchal consciousness and worldview, then I think there's hope. I love the definition of hope from David Orr, the environmental philosopher. He says, hope is a verb with the sleeves rolled up. So hope is proportionate to our willing to work, to do the work. And the work has to be an inner work as well as an outer work. It's not enough. It's modern thinking to think, oh, you change things by just manipulating things and getting the mechanics right. No. There has to be an inner work as well. We have to get our hearts shape. We have to cleanse our hearts. I think this is part of what the marching is about today in the protesting, that people are dealing with getting in touch with their third chakra, the moral outrage at racism and bad policing when policing turns bad, and the structures that deliver bad policing. But we have to take a look at all our structures, our educational structures, and our legal structures, and our economic structures, political structures, our religious structures. It's not just about individual virtue. It is about creating structures that allow justice to happen. And again, Aquinas is very big on that. And this is why Dr. King invoked Aquinas in his important, iconic letter from Birmingham jail, because he had read enough of Aquinas to realize that Aquinas really stood for the priority of justice and the common good, and that it's not enough to have individual freedom if we can't all be in a network where freedom and justice is available to all, not just a few.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, with that in mind, there's a question here wondering, considering current events and all that's going on in the world, who would you consider to be a modern day mystic, and how does one qualify for that title?
Qualify for the title. Well, we're all mystics, so everyone qualifies. A mystic is a lover. A mystic is one who tastes the awe and the wonder of life and tastes it deeply. So we were all children. As children, we were all mystics. We were in love with life. We were amazed and full of wonder at being here and at discovering more and more about life, more and more about ourselves. This is why learning, when it's healthy, can be an act of extreme joy, because there's great delight in learning. And again, Aquinas addresses that. He says, the proper objects of the heart are truth and justice. So the discovery of truth, in whatever form, excites us and delights us. It feeds our heart. It nurtures us. And of course, all learning is not done in school. Unfortunately, school sometimes is quite, what should I say, divorced from learning. Education can divorce itself from learning, just like law can divorce itself from justice, and religion can divorce itself from spirituality. That's how we humans evolve sometimes, or devolve, is that our big ongoing institutions become a thing in themselves, corporation or institution in itself, that often drives spirit out. So, for example, education has devolved in many ways to be what I call knowledge factories instead of wisdom schools. Knowledge and wisdom are not the same thing. Wisdom is much bigger than knowledge. Knowledge is about facts and information. Okay, that's useful. But is that all there is? No, it isn't, but it may be all there is in our schools. Thomas Berry points out that most of the destruction of the planet today is happening with people with PhDs. So it's education that's killing the planet, because so much education has divorced itself from wisdom or spirituality. So I think all these issues come in response to your question.
Yeah, in fact, that's a great segue to another question that comes in from Michelle. She's referring back to the conversation you had with Stephen Dinan. She says, I love what you said about scientists telling you about finding their calling by falling in love with something in nature at a very young age. Do you think it's the same for artists or anyone else for that matter? Can those of us who don't know yet what we're here for find our calling by looking back at what we fell in love with at a young age?
Well, first, I'm glad that that person was listening to my story, because I do like that story. I think it is very telling that so many scientists, well, 100% of the scientists that I've met have responded to my question, when did you first feel you want to be a scientist, in the same way, if they go back to their childhood. But I don't think that all of our vocations go back that far. And I think also that our vocations, they evolve, often according to circumstances in culture, but also circumstances in our own lives. Just to be concrete again, I've heard a lot of people say regarding the current marching in the street and so forth, that this is the first marching they've ever done. This is the first protesting they've done in the streets. And it's never too late. That is to say, getting in touch with one's passion for justice and one's outrage at injustice, at the obvious murder, killing of a black man by a white policeman in a torturous way, almost like lynching, a public way, with a smirk on his face. This outrages people. Well, I hope that people are also outraged by the climate change crisis. When science tells us there are 9 or 10 years left to change our ways as a species, or we will not be able to undo the damage that's coming upon us, how millions and millions of people will have to abandon cities all along the American coast, but Asian coast. The largest cities in the world are built on oceans, and the oceans are rising. So, I mean, that's just one example. Of course, the excessive storms we're having, hurricanes. I was with scientists a couple summers ago, and they said, what climate change means concretely is this. Wet places are going to get wetter. That means more storms, more floods. And dry places are going to get drier. More drought, more fires, and frankly, more coronaviruses, because there's a direct link between coronavirus and climate change. So all these things should have us marching, or the equivalent, stirring us up, getting our anger going. Remember what Aquinas says, the proper objects of the heart are truth and justice. So, and he says, injustice moves the heart. So this too then is part of the vocational development that's going on today. I mean, look, we admire so rightly and so much these wonderful doctors and nurses and health care staff and so forth who are doing this brave and necessary and demanding work during this coronavirus. But notice the vocation of these nurses, these doctors, these personnel who operate the administration, clean the buildings and all the rest. That vocation has evolved. In the current circumstances, it's become more intense, more demanding. So that's what goes on with life. It evolves. And an artist has to ask today, well, how does my art serve in the current circumstances? Or some people may be asking, how can I contribute? And they're learning, maybe on the spot, how to set up food banks, how to assist people in retirement homes, for example, people who are so vulnerable. So, I mean, one's vocation develops. And some people discover they're artists when they're 50 years old, not when they're 5. And this is true of many callings. So you don't want to lock a vocation into just the ages of 6 and 7. But I think there's a deeper meaning there, that is when we're young and flexible and open-minded, that we are open to wonder and awe and thanksgiving. And that doesn't happen just when you're 6. It can happen when you're 26, 36, and in 66. In the present circumstance, too, when death is literally facing so many people and it's no longer hidden. Death also raises the question of vocation. What do you want to contribute before you die, before you leave this world? Otto Rank, a great psychologist, said the artist is one who wants to leave behind a gift. That's his definition of artist, one who wants to leave behind a gift. Well, I think we're all artists, just like we're all mystics. So what gifts do we want to leave behind? And I think that the current crisis and crises, how can we contribute to ending racism, to building a post-racist economy, politics, religion, education? Those are questions that challenge all of our vocations today. Our vocations are not set in stone. They evolve like a great river, a great river.
Okay, thank you for that. And you brought something up that a couple people were asking about. Can you talk about how COVID is connected with climate change? That piqued a lot of interest.
Yes. As humans have expanded more and more and more, we've taken over the habitats of other species. And that has a lot to do with not only COVID, but take, for example, the AIDS virus. I think we now realize that that virus began in Africa with monkeys, and that it killed 38 million people. It's pretty easy to forget that. But that virus, 38 million people were killed by it. And but it originated again with humans invading the habitat of other species because we are so swelling in our population. So this, apparently the COVID happened from humans being bitten by bats. So we got too close to the bats. And maybe some people are saying they were trying to eat them, found them in a market. I don't know if that's totally proven yet, but even that we're encroaching upon the environment of other species, and there's going to be a price to pay. And every scientist worthy of the salt says that the coronavirus is not the end of the game. There will be other viruses similar in people's lifetimes who are living today. Part of the scandal of the badly run response of our government is that under the previous government, they had set up a whole system to be in place to address the emergencies like coronavirus. And for some reason, the present government dismantled that department, that structure, when it moved in to the White House, if you will. So we have to be alert. And once again, is it our anthropocentrism that we think that all the beings on the planet are here to serve us? I think something like coronavirus is reminding us otherwise. And so climate change is bringing about a lot of danger, really. And of course, the disappearance of entire species, disappearance of insects, of bees. All of them so many of them are very useful for our needs as humans, but all beings have a right to exist. And we humans have to slow down our reproduction. We don't need a lot more humans on the planet. As David Gorton says, what we need is to treat every human child, well, so that they can come to their potential. But again, this is a shift for our species, because for hundreds of thousands of years, the struggle, the key was to have children because so few survived to help keep the species going. But today it's flipped, that we have so many human beings that limiting human population and also training it better, not only with skills, but with inner skills to understand our passions of love, beauty, but also to tame our passions of hatred or revenge, how to teach forgiveness, how to teach nonviolence, how to teach love, how to teach justice. These issues become more and more important. And I feel because we're talking values here, this is where our educational system is such a complete failure. I think their educational system claims to be value free, which really means that we train people to follow the ongoing values, so-called, of our culture, such as greed, such as consumer capitalism, avarice, and the rest. And that's why we're outgrowing the planet. That at the rate we're going, we would need 4 planets for every being on Earth to live like North Americans do. 3 more planets, 4 total. And at the rate we're going, we're gobbling up the planet 1.6 times more taking than giving. So that's why the inner work is just as important as the outer work today. And it must feed the outer work. It must feed our reinvention of education. And we can agree on common values, such as community, such as justice and fairness, such as dismantling, deconstructing racism, sexism, homophobia, the destruction, the genocide that is embedded in the histories of all of us, really, that we're all in trauma from these realities of slavery and genocide. All of us, black and white. So we act confusedly when we're in trauma. So all this is part of the agenda of our survival as a species. And being aware of the rest of creation, how it is all sacred and is one web of creation of which we're part here. Hildegard of Bingen talked about that in the 12th century. And current feminists and others are using that same language, the web of creation. A web is a network. And while there's plenty of good give and take in a web, it's flexible and it's strong. Nevertheless, one species in that web cannot dominate. Very patriarchal word. It's been used a lot lately by our Attorney General and President, dominate. We cannot dominate others, whether human or more than human. So all that is part of the teaching of Aquinas too, that he has so much to say about all these things. And he had a truly ecological and green consciousness. Remember that he came right after Francis of Assisi, who came right after Hildegard of Bingen. So there was this whole green awareness, this awareness of nature and its sacredness, cosmology. It's very indigenous. Aquinas, like these other great medieval thinkers and actors, does not begin with the human. It begins with the cosmos. And that's how indigenous people begin. And that's how you move out of anthropocentrism, patriarchy, even sexism, and certainly out of reptilian brain efforts to dominate, to put domination first. So all these spiritual transformations need to happen at this time if we're to carry out the great vocations that people have, whether in medicine, education, law, economics, or religion, or art.
Thank you for that. For those of you who are just joining us, we're here with Matthew Fox, learning about his upcoming course, Reclaiming Original Goodness, which begins Thursday, July 2nd, and you can log on to thomasaquinascourse.com for all the details and to register. So let's get back into Thomas Aquinas specifically. Elaine wants to know, how does Thomas Aquinas address how to learn and unlearn in times of crisis?
Well, of course, to be human is to learn. I mean, Aquinas would say that this search for truth, as he says, is embedded within all of us. It's what our heart yearns for. Rabbi Heschel has this great statement. He says, learning is not for life, learning is life. And that's the Jewish tradition. And Aquinas was very attuned to that himself. As long as we're learning, we're alive. As long as we're really alive, we're learning. Now, it's pretty easy today not to be learning, not to be very alive. I think a lot of our television fare is less about learning and experiencing life than just kind of being passive and watching others vicariously, therefore watching others live life and therefore living vicariously. I think we have to be very careful as a species at this time that we not turn over our souls and our powers of living, therefore, and learning to some media conglomerates who have their version, which is always the lowest common denominator of what entertainment is. Now, there's a place for entertainment. We all need to relax. But when entertainment displaces learning or sets us back, someone mentioned earlier, a devolution instead of an evolution, we have to be alert. We'd be taken for a ride. And I think that there are powerful forces in the media today of hate. Hate radio has been going on for over 20 years. It's gotten us into all kinds of trouble like we're in today. There's now hate television too. And so we have to be conscious of this. And we have to even ask the basic question. How is it that people can become multi-billionaires by selling hate and lies? A study just came out today about how the far right-wing media in many ways is responsible for a lot of people dying of coronavirus because they've been telling untruthful stories about how, oh, you don't need a mask. Oh, you can shake hands. Oh, you can gather all tight and intimately in small spaces and bars and restaurants. So truth is not easily attained in our time because, frankly, capitalism, the desire to just make more money on more money on more money, to get rich no matter what, is, what should I say? It takes over a lot of our media. And the result is that we have situations like today where thousands of people are dying every day because of ignorance that has been peddled by the media. So, I think we have to keep our wits about us, and we have to step back and look at the whole situation. How is it that people who sell hatred and anger make it on the media and become rich doing it, and then they keep doing it? And again, Aquinas critiques a lot of that. He says that avarice, person who's committed to avarice, that means making more and more money, is not committed to compassion. That there's the door shuts on our capacity for compassion when avarice becomes our God and our idol. And so we have to ask the question, have we baked avarice into our economic system? Have we baked it into our media, which is such an educational, in quotation marks, device in our world today? So that truth does not matter, but making more money for the few. And that's not just the radio announcer who's leading in hate radio or even the local station, but you have to talk about shareholders too. The stock market itself. Are there any values applicable there? If if someone wants to make money burning down a society, does that justify burning down a society? Where does it stop?
Interesting. Thank you. Well, let's take this just a little further here. Mary's asking then, should our prayer be to increase our perseverance in good rather than overcoming evil?
Yes, because one of the best ways, not the only way, to overcome evil is to pursue the good. In other words, to build up good laws and good people to make it harder for evil. So, for example, just laws then create a buffer between injustice, and it makes it harder to do evil. It doesn't eliminate it, but it makes it harder. That's what a healthy justice system is about. And there's so many ways where the commitment to goodness, and again, when Aquinas defines salvation as preserving the good, think how immediately that applies to the environment. So, because as a species, we have inherited a beautiful world, a diverse world, a healthy world. There was, for a long time, healthy waters, healthy oceans, healthy soil, healthy forests. And if we were to commit to that again, then that will give us the energy to stand up to the burning down of rainforests today, you see. And even the energy to study and to learn what a healthy ecosystem is all about. And to stand up to the politicians who are bringing about evil, those who are bringing about evil by selling off the rainforest, for example, by dumping chemicals into the rivers, into the lakes, into the soil, into the ocean. So, I think the goodness comes first, but awareness that there is injustice, there is evil everywhere too. And as a species, we can be complicit. So we want to be, critiquing ourselves and those institutions that we support, those movements. But again, when Aquinas says all injustice, he says all anger comes from an awareness of injustice. So he is saying that we're all born with this sense of justice in us. And this is why I think so many white people are now marching against racism, that the awful revelations, thanks to the iPhone, of the murder in Minneapolis, rang bells for everybody, certainly for Black people, about all the other instances of oppression over the centuries. And white people are beginning to get it. And this is not an isolated event, it's part of systemic racism. And so to take a hard look at all our institutions is how you combat evil. And you create better ones. And that's the good thing, the goodness. You give birth to politics and politicians, to legal structures and lawyers. That means reinventing your educational system, and judges, etc., that really stand for justice, not just for preserving a system that is clearly failing us.
Okay. Well, looking at the clock here, we have time for a few more questions, but before we take those, I want to go ahead and give a few details about the class itself for those of you who are asking for that kind of information. Once again, the course is called Reclaiming Original Goodness. And this is going to be, I believe, a truly life changing 7 week journey with Matthew and his expert guidance, where you'll put your faith into action, joining spiritual seekers throughout history who've blazed Thomas Aquinas' trailblazing wisdom and cultivate compassion, courage, and resilience to meet life's greatest challenges. And the 7 week course takes place on Thursdays at 5 p.m. Pacific, beginning Thursday, July 2nd. And as I mentioned earlier, if you can't join us live, that's fine. You won't miss any of the actual teachings because you'll receive audio and video recordings, transcripts, and all course handouts on your course homepage. Also, I'd like to remind everyone that we offer a no-risk money-back guarantee on all of our courses, giving you a full 2 weeks until July 16th in this case to make sure that you absolutely love it. And as an added option, all participants are welcome to connect in a private Facebook community group so you can connect with one another. Also, everyone who registers receives the Reclaiming Original Goodness bonus collection. First, you'll receive a video dialogue with Matthew and J. Hunter Hill entitled Original Blessing, Connect with All of Creation. And next, you'll get a video dialogue with Matthew and Brian Thomas Swim called Sheer Joy, Conversations with Thomas Aquinas. You'll also receive a video dialogue with Matthew and Jerry Maynard entitled Global Justice and Cosmic Oneness, Wisdom in Action. Plus, you'll get a video dialogue with Matthew and Adam Bucko called Thomas Aquinas in the 21st Century. And when you register by midnight Pacific on Thursday, June 25th, you will receive this extra gift, and that is a video dialogue with Matthew and Carolyn Mace entitled We Are Capable of the Universe, the Tao of Thomas Aquinas. So before we get back into some Q&A, Matthew, let me ask you, what are you most looking forward to sharing in your upcoming course?
Well, I just feel that Aquinas is one of the most pivotal figures in intellectual history in the West and spiritual, mystical history. I think he's been distorted for centuries by what I would call a Thomistic cult of Aquinas that has shrunken his genius to something much, much smaller. He is so enlivened by science. His whole life was a dedication to bringing science into a consciousness, into religion and philosophy. And he's so pro-science that he has so much to teach us today. And at the same time, he was a proto-feminist. Why? Because he was a non-dualist. And he turned his back on Plato and his dualism, and that means hundreds of years of Christian theologians who followed Plato down the path of dualism. But Aquinas utterly rejected Plato because of his dualism, and he tells us that. That's why he chose Aristotle. Now today we have other scientists besides Aristotle, of course. Einstein is certainly one of the key ones. But the non-dualism of respecting the energy and the power of matter and how closely it interlines with the spirit. All this is Aquinas' passion as well. And in many ways, he's so indigenous in his consciousness, as I alluded to earlier, because he thinks in terms of the cosmos, the whole web of creation, not just the human. And so the human needs to find its place within the web of creation again. And Aquinas leads us there and helps us there. And his influence has been so amazing. Just to cite one example, Julian of Norwich, who lived a century after him, but who lived through a pandemic her entire life, the Black Death, that kept coming back in waves from the time she was 7 years old when it first hit until she died probably about the age of 80. That pandemic was present. And yet, what was her spiritual teaching? It was all centered around goodness. And she gets that from Aquinas, who handed him to Mechtilde Magdeburg, and then to Meister Eckhart, and then came Julian. So that tradition of goodness but you also have in Francis of Assisi and Hildegard of Bingen. And then, of course, you have it in the wisdom literature of Israel. The first page of the Bible is all about the goodness of creation, even the very goodness of creation, including the human. To me, a lot of the false religion of our time, fundamentalism, has just ripped out the first page of the Bible. Really, all that talk about goodness, they're always talking about sin and that, and which is so human-centered of them, but ignoring the blessing and the goodness that creation is, and of which we humans are a part. So anyways, I think Aquinas represents a revolution in religion. That you could line up all the issues of fundamentalism. It's fear of science, it's anti-intellectualism, it's I'm saved and you're not, it's lack of ecumenism. Aquinas was so open to all thinkers. Aristotle was a pagan. He wasn't a Christian. He never read the Bible. He wasn't a Jew either. And Aquinas says, whoever utters it always comes from the Holy Spirit. So he was committed to truth. And it's such an affirmation of our humanity, our common humanity. That's why one of our classes, the third class, is going to be about what does it mean to be human? Because I think that's really the question that Aquinas addresses throughout his work. And it means, among other things, that we're not just human. We connect to all the other beings and all the other aspects of being alive, that is, to the universe, as well as to our own souls and own hearts and own immediate relationships. So he just has so much to teach us today. So I'm just excited about sprinkling this good news out there and hoping that people will respond and shape it to these times and to one's own personal needs, whether you're a man or a woman, whether you're young or old, whether you're an activist or contemplative. Aquinas has something deep and substantive to say to each of us and to these times we're living in. And I think in times of chaos like this, we need to return to the greatest souls, our ancestors, who have the most to speak to us, because time's running out, and we shouldn't be wasting our time with a lot of prattle or, what should I say, small-minded thinking. We need to tap into, we all have the genius for it, to tap into some of these great souls that were our ancestors. And I think Aquinas is clearly one of those people.
All right, thank you for that. And while we're specifically on the topic of Thomas Aquinas, a couple people are asking, do you have any recommended reading that people can do in preparation for the course? What sort of books would you recommend, that type of thing?
Sure. Well, in all humility, I have to mention my most recent book. It's a short book. You see, it's short, on Thomas Aquinas, called The Tao of Thomas Aquinas, First Wisdom for Hard Times. And I wrote that title before the coronavirus hit us a few months ago. The book just came out a few months ago, but just before the coronavirus hit us. So I think this is a fine introduction. We will not just be, what should I say, speaking to this book, but it would be a great introduction. It would set the stage, if you will, for your deeper understanding of Aquinas. Now, I have a brief bio on him there. It's very brief. But in my bigger book on Aquinas, which really is the basis of the small book called Sheer Joy, and this just came out this month, actually, this version, it's a new version, a beautiful blue cover there. Sheer Joy, Conversations with Thomas Aquinas on Creative Spirituality. A very long introduction to Aquinas, like 75 pages or so, where I go into a lot of his history and an overview of his thought and so forth, as well as I interview him in these, about 500 pages, because I wanted to de-scholasticize him, to make him easier to understand for a 21st century person. And I think it really works, because every sentence from Aquinas is footnoted, so it's all his words, but I may take his words from his Summa Theologica, from his commentary on Job, from his commentary on the Psalms, or from his Contra Gentes, or so forth. So his answers come from all of his works, because I translated many of his works that had never been in English before, or German, or French, or Italian. And so it's a real broad delivery of Aquinas' thought. And I think it's very exciting. And so that's the mother source of the shorter book, The Tao of Thomas Aquinas. And I can recommend two other thinkers is Joseph Pieper, Pieper. He's written several small books on Aquinas, all of which are good and reliable. And then my mentor, Père Chenu, Chenu. Pieper is German, Chenu is French. He was a French Dominican. His book on understanding St. Thomas Aquinas is a classic work. It's somewhat academic. It's somewhat scholarly, and it's not short. But for those who have the time to go into something like that, he is always reliable. Chenu is. And by the way, he wrote a wonderful article in my book, Western Spirituality, Historical Roots, Ecumenical Roots, and on Aquinas and the passions, and Aquinas and the body politic. It's an excellent article. In fact, it's two articles. He gave me permission to marry them. And that's present in that book called Western Spirituality. That would be a very good grounding also. But I will share bibliography as we go along. But those are a few background books that I can recommend. And my daily meditations too. I've had several articles recently, several meditations on Aquinas in light of Martin Luther King and the whole marches against racism and so forth. The connection King and Aquinas on the common good, and even Gandhi and Aquinas. Those essays are very readable and quite short. So you go to my daily meditations with MatthewFox.org, and they're from the last few weeks or so. Mm-hmm.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. Let's do a question here. There's no name attached, but the question is, would you please speak more about original goodness? How can we cultivate it in our daily lives?
Well, that's a very good question. Meditation can help, of course. And of course, there are many kinds of meditation. One is to let go, to sit and let go of images of bad messaging that we've received over the years, maybe from parents, maybe from teachers, maybe from clergy, maybe from the culture at large, to sink into our sense of our existence. Aquinas says all being is good. All being is good. So at our root, we go into our being and away from all the cacophony of people's projections upon us. We come back to the basic lesson that to be is a blessing, as Rabbi Heschel said. To be is a blessing. To live is holy. So we are all a blessings. And science helps us to understand this. 13.8 billion years has brought us here. My goodness. There must be a reason we're here. And beauty is part of it. We all carry beauty within us, and the potential for making beauty, for healing, for service, for celebrating, for healing. So that's one kind of meditation. Another is to go out into nature itself, to go walking, and to be with water, to be with plants, to be with animals, and to realize the intrinsic friendship between us and the rest of nature. It's goodness meeting goodness. A wonderful line from Baudelaire, the French artist, who says, we walk through forests, plural, forests of physical things, but are also spiritual things that look on us with affectionate looks. And so the rest of creation is blessing us and is affectionate toward us and recognizes our goodness, maybe more than a lot of humans do. And of course, to meditate on the beauty of creation, the goodness of creation. Aquinas says that all creation invites us to meditate on goodness. The divinity is present in all of creation, and spirit is present throughout. So, and to get back to the basics, like breath. Breath is such a gift, and we've all been given it. We've given the lungs that it feeds, that works so well with it. There's breath, there's air, there's water. 60 to 70% of our body is water. 92% of our blood is water. So to get back to the basics, earth, air, fire, water, we have this fire of love. We have this fire of compassion. We have this fire of justice to oppose injustice. It's in all of us. Earth, air, fire, water. And of course, the earth. We are of the earth. We are born of the earth. And the Bible story talks about clay into which the divine breath was breathed. So we are earth. We are earthy. And earth is marvelous. Earthiness is marvelous. The God of being said, holy people draw to themselves all that is earthy, all that is earthy. So I think just those four ancient elements, earth, air, fire, water, are a reminder that we did not make ourselves, but the earth has made us, and the universe has made us, and 13.8 billion years has made us. And spirit flows through all this and through us. And here we are, and we ourselves can give birth to so much. So our creativity is itself a co-creation with spirit, where we give back the blessing, the goodness that we've received, and we share it with others, including our children in the next generation.
All right. Well, this has just been a lovely conversation. I want to thank our viewers for being with us today and for all of your questions. And also, Reclaiming Original Goodness begins Thursday, July 2nd. Again, you can visit thomasaqui.com to learn more and to register. And thank you so much, Matthew, for our time together. Do you have any final words before we let you go for the day?
I feel I've uttered a lot of words today, so I want to thank you, Lisa, for being our MC today, and I look forward to working with you and others in this course. I'm really looking forward to it, and I hope that people will derive a lot of joy and delight from it, and also strength. At this time, we need inner strength, and I think a person of Aquinas' stature, an ancestor like Aquinas, will pass on the strength and the courage that he had in his time, but that we truly need today as well in this new context.
All right, beautifully stated. Thank you again, Matthew Fox, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. On behalf of all of us at the Shift Network, I wish you well and look forward to having you on this course or perhaps another one in the future. Have a great day, everyone.